I have received countless comments on my previous videos, especially on my Avanti ones, regarding how great Virgin Trains West Coast were as an operator, and how many people wish they returned. But should we be viewing Virgin Trains' tenure as an operator on the Intercity West Coast franchise as a success, or were they perhaps a failed franchise? That's what I'll be trying to answer in this two-part Virgin West Coast mini-series, with today's episode taking us to around the halfway mark of Virgin's operational history. If you do enjoy this video, be sure to check out my previous videos on rail franchises, and do consider liking, subscribing and joining the channel. Thank you. First, let's look at how Virgin Trains became an operator. During the privatisation of British Rail in the late 1990s, the Virgin Rail Group was founded from the Virgin Group and Stagecoach Group. This new rail group would aim to run several rail franchises, and initially bid for the Intercity West Coast and Cross Country franchises, as well as the Gatwick Express franchise. For the West Coast franchise, the franchise we are interested in today, the Virgin Group put forward two bids, one which included an option to refurbish all existing stock, and another which would see all stock replaced by brand new tilting trains, but would require more investment from the operator. Virgin confirmed that it would be choosing the latter tilting trains option if it won the franchise. In early 1997, it was confirmed that Virgin had won the bid to operate both the West Coast and Cross Country franchises, with the West Coast franchise running for 15 years until 2012. The new franchise would see a £500 million investment from Virgin Group, who would brand their services Virgin Trains, and the government to order 54 tilting trains for 2002, with a mixture of 8 and 9 car electric trains. As well as this, Railtrack, the precursor to Network Rail, promised £1.5 billion worth of upgrades to the West Coast Mainline, which would see top speeds increase from 90 miles an hour to 140 miles an hour. These upgrades could cut journey time substantially, including Manchester to London being reached in under 2 hours. So then, where would Virgin operate to? Virgin would inherit the intercity operations of the West Coast Mainline, running from London Euston, out towards Milton Keynes, Birmingham, Stafford, Manchester, Crewe, Liverpool, Warrington, Lancaster, Carlisle, Glasgow and Edinburgh, but would add to their network over the following years. In addition, Virgin would run a few services a day towards Holyhead via Chester. As for rolling stock, Virgin would inherit some of the oldest stock of any operator, including Class 86s, 87s and Class 90 electric locomotives, which would haul Mark II and Mark III carriages with a driving van trailer. Virgin would also inherit high-speed trains and Class 47s for non-electrified services, such as those to Holyhead. Virgin confirmed that it would be replacing its entire stock with brand new Class 390 Pendolinos and Class 221 Super Voyagers, with the Super Voyagers technically being part of the Virgin Cross Country franchise, but leased to Virgin West Coast. Anyway, on the 9th of March 1997, Virgin Trains, or officially West Coast Trains Limited, began operations, taking over from the previous Intercity nationalised operator, calling it around 56 stations and operating 15 of those. Straight away, as mentioned previously, Virgin got to business, ordering the Class 390s from Alstom. The 390 Pendolinos themselves are incredible trains, ones which deserve their own videos, and something that I will be planning to make later in the year. The 54 new 9-car tilting trains would be ready for testing by 2000, and built in Washwood Heath, Birmingham. This would be coincided with the refurbishment of Virgin's existing fleet, including new liveries and mechanical updates to the Class 43s. The 140 mph speed limit increase would come about by 2005, with 125 mph speed limit being achieved a few years prior, in 2002. Virgin themselves must be given praise for how involved they were in the construction of the Class 390s, with Virgin's founder, Richard Branson, being hugely involved in the company, despite running several other major businesses. Virgin must also be given praise for the new services they introduced in 1998. These two new daily services would run from Euston to Shrewsbury and Blackpool North, linking the two towns to London for the first time since British Rail. However, despite Branson promising service improvements, the ageing rolling stock and constant engineering works to complete the infrastructure upgrades necessary would hinder Virgin's initial operations. A May 1990 report, released by the Office of Passenger Rail Franchising, revealed that Virgin West Coast were one of the most unreliable rail operators in the country. In the report, Virgin West Coast were ranked in the D tier of reliability and punctuality, with only 4 operators worse than them, one of them being Virgin Cross Country. Virgin had just 80% of services arriving on time, and had a cancellation rate of 2%, putting them towards the bottom of the pile. Elsewhere in 1999, engineering work significantly hindered Virgin. Work at Carstairs Junction, near Carlisle, led to services being unable to travel into Scotland for 4 consecutive weekends. This work would allow the lines to be electrified for the Pendolinos to enter service by 2002. Other works in 1999 led to several route closures at weekends and a 5-day closure in October for track relaying at 5 different locations. This came at a time when Railtrack confirmed that the upgrades would now cost over £4 billion, and the 140-mile-an-hour upgrade would most likely be delayed due to issues with funding for the new signalling system required to reach the milestone. The increase in cost was blamed on changing signalling systems to improve safety. By December 1999, these costs had reached the £5 billion mark, with Railtrack confirming the 140-mile-an-hour upgrade would most likely not go ahead, due to fears of the new signalling system not working. Despite Railtrack later suggesting that they could reach 140 miles an hour by laying conventional signalling systems, the huge added cost to this meant that it never happened, with the upgrade only going as far as 125 miles an hour. Elsewhere, Virgin withdrew its daily Shrewsbury service due to lack of passengers and lack of paths on the West Coast Mainline. By 2000, the first 390 Pendolino body shells had been constructed, with testing commencing in 2001. 2001 wasn't a perfect year though. Reliability wasn't great on the West Coast Mainline. The old rolling stock and infrastructure issues had led Virgin to have some of the worst reliability out of any operator, reaching lows of 65% of services, arriving within 10 minutes in 2001. Punctuality was only slightly improved by 2007, when the Class 390s and 221 Voyagers had fully entered service. Anyway, back to the 2000s, and on July the 23rd, 2002, following extensive training, Virgin were able to officially launch their groundbreaking new train, the Class 390. A special run from Birmingham International to Manchester Piccadilly, run by 390-010, was the first time the press were allowed on the new groundbreaking train. I will go into much more detail on the units in the later video, but its groundbreaking tilting technology, regenerative braking, and stylish interiors led many to suggest that the Class 390 would be Britain's best ever train. Virgin, anticipating high passenger growth, opted to extend all Class 390s to 9 carriages, with Virgin also signing a deal with Porterbrook to rebuild its 12 Class 47s into Class 57s as rescue locomotives for the Class 390s, eventually increasing this number to 16 for Holyhead services. Testing ramped up in the latter half of 2002, with Pendolino introduction on Manchester to Euston services starting from January the 27th, 2003, marking the beginning of the end of the loco-hauled stock with Virgin. Despite some teething issues during introduction, the Pendolinos did help to improve reliability, reaching 68% by 2003 and crossing the 70% threshold by 2004. Back to 2003 though, and the introduction of the Class 390s and Class 57s allowed the Class 86s and Mark II carriages to finally be withdrawn from operations. Furthermore, Virgin decided to withdraw its daily Blackpool to Euston service due to lack of passengers, with Tom Windsor, the rail regulator, suggesting that Railtrack, now Network Rail, may not have the funds to complete the West Coast Mainline upgrade. By 2004, Virgin's punctuality was now at around 75%, and more Class 390s had entered service, meaning that Virgin could withdraw the last of its HST sets from Holyhead services, which were replaced by 5-car Class 221 Super Voyagers from cross country, and Class 47 and Class 90 hauled Mark III services. In September, the first direct Llandudno to Euston service began operating, with Virgin using a 5-car Class 221 Super Voyager on a daily return service to the Welsh seaside resort. The Llandudno to Euston service was the first time since September 1964, exactly 40 years prior, that Llandudno received direct London services, rather than having to change at nearby Llandudno Junction. This also came with Flint regaining London services for the first time in many years, with Virgin hoping to add more stations to its network. Furthermore, Virgin also introduced full tilting services with the Class 221s and Class 390s, reducing journey times even further, with full 125-mile-an-hour services arriving in September 2005, concluding the first stage of the West Coast Mainline upgrade. September 2005 was also the first time that the Class 390s were hauled on passenger services using Class 57s, with them being modified to supply the necessary electrical power to the Pendolino, allowing for the luxury of the new trains to be extended off-grid on the North Wales coast to Holyhead. With this came the end of all loco-hauled services, bar the Holyhead Pendolino services. In 2006, Virgin's punctuality reached new highs of 83.5%, with the withdrawal of the last unreliable aging loco-hauled stock and the completion of the first phase of the West Coast Mainline upgrade, leading to this increase in punctuality. Virgin also introduced radio-controlled watches to ensure strict timekeeping, with other practices introduced by Virgin to increase punctuality, such as increased station signage to ensure people knew which coach would stop at which part of the platform. Also in 2006, Virgin reintroduced a solo Mark III set hauled by a GBRF Class 87 to cover for a lack of Class 390s, due to more needing repairs than usual, with this set being withdrawn by the end of the year. Despite the Class 390s being mostly accident-free, this all changed in 2007. At 17:30, on the 23rd of February 2007, 390-033 City of Glasgow departed London Euston on a northbound Glasgow service. Just north of Oxenholme Lake District, in the small village of Greyrig, at 8:15, the Pendolino ran over a faulty set of points just after Docker Viaduct. The 9-car Pendolino was travelling at 95 miles an hour and was carrying around 105 passengers, with 4 crew members at the time of derailment. The train swayed violently as the first coach left the rails, sliding down an embankment. The second carriage jackknifed against the back of the first, forcing the first all the way down the embankment, eventually turning 180 degrees, facing the opposite way of travel. The last 7 coaches derailed, with 6 ending up in a nearby field. In the resulting aftermath, 500 rescuers, along with 12 ambulances, several fire engines, and rescue helicopters, attended the scene. Heavy rain and the dark hindered the rescue operation, with access to the remote site incredibly limited. It was only in the morning that the extent of the accident could be seen. The front 5 carriages, all standard class, were by far the worst affected. The rear carriages were in better condition, with the very rear driving coach nearly upright on the ballast. Thanks to the Pendolino's incredible build quality and design, the damage was only confined to the crumple zones at the carriage ends, with carriage structure being mostly maintained and window damage limited. The lighting in the first 4 coaches failed after derailment, leading to a difficult evacuation, with the front 2 coaches being the worst affected in the crash. Overall, by some miracle, just 1 death was recorded, an 84-year-old from Glasgow. 89 others were injured, accounting for over 80% of people on board. Richard Branson visited the site the day after the incident, hailing driver Ian Black as a hero for remaining seated and attempting to slow the train down. He also praised local farmers who assisted the emergency workers. Finally, Branson commented on how pivotal the Pendolino was to limiting the death toll, with him comparing the train to a tank. If the train was formed of older Mark II or Mark III coaches, Branson predicted the number of injuries and mortalities would have been horrendous. The overall cause of the accident was a failed stretcher bar arrangement at Labrig Point's crossover, with all 3 bars being faulty in some aspect. A safety inspection of the bar arrangement 5 days prior had not taken place as it should have, with Network Rail being found guilty of not providing sufficient safety standards and being fined over £4 million, whilst taking full responsibility for the crash. The line reopened under a month later in March, with speeds restricted to 50 miles an hour around the crash site. Overall, the crash proved that the Pendolinos were incredibly designed units, credited with saving many lives. As for 390-033, the unit was scrapped, with its surviving rear driving coach used for training. Losing a 390 set was quite big news for Virgin, as they needed most of the units for daily service, so they reinstated a Mark III set, hauled by a Class 90 to replace the scrap 390. This Mark III set was refurbished to match the interior aesthetic of the Class 390s as best as possible, and featured a similar layout to the Class 390s, including aircon and plug sockets. The Pretendolino, as it was named, was also repainted into Virgin's silver livery to mimic the Pendolino as best as possible. The refurbished Pretendolino was brought into service in 2009, after receiving its refurbishment in Doncaster. Virgin did consider leasing 2 Class 180s, but decided against this due to poor reliability. Elsewhere, it was all changed for the franchise in December 2007. A franchise reshuffle meant that the Birmingham to Scotland services would now be transferred to the Intercity West Coast franchise from Cross Country, who would now be ran by Arriva, with 3, 4 and 13 5-car Class 221 Super Voyagers transferring to Virgin West Coast. Elsewhere in December, Network Rail were criticised by Virgin for a short-notice line closure on New Year's Eve. Virgin suggested that Network Rail broke their licence agreement by closing the West Coast Mainline near Rugby with short notice. The line was planned to be closed on the 27th for 3 days, but Network Rail added an extra day of work just under a month before the engineering work was expected to commence, citing it as being necessary to finish and as part of the major work undertaken in the Rugby area. Virgin highlighted the 60,000 travellers that they were expecting to travel on New Year's Eve, with rail replacement buses being provided, adding at least an hour to journey times. Network Rail implied that the festive period was the quietest part of the year, so it was the best time to undertake engineering work, with the remodelling of Rugby Station being one of the biggest undertakings of the West Coast Mainline upgrade programme. Eventually, the Office of Rail Regulation told Network Rail it must ensure that any further engineering works would finish on time and wouldn't be able to overrun at short notice. They were fined £14 million in the process. Network Rail Chief Executive Ian Coucher said Network Rail had implemented new military-style command posts to ensure delays would not be repeated for the next New Year period. Also in 2008, the new December timetable promised much improvement for Virgin. However, they would cease the direct Llandudno to Euston service, but would bring a direct Wrexham to Euston service for the first time since British Rail. Elsewhere, the Class 221s, which would have an internal refresh to include an extra first-class carriage, would be used on all Holyhead services, bar one Saturday Pendolino return service, with Virgin acquiring 5 more Class 221s from cross-country. Further frequency increases were announced in conjunction with the completion of the West Coast Mainline upgrade on the 14th of December 2008. The now £13 billion upgrade, this number included the new rolling stock, would cut some journey times by up to 30%, despite not facilitating the full 140-mile-an-hour operations that Virgin initially desired. All in all, 174 bridges were altered or rebuilt, 800 points were replaced, with over 1,700 miles of rail and sleepers laid, and 53 new or extended platforms, portraying the huge scale of the work. The upgrade capacity would enable 1,000 extra trains to use the main line per week, with upgrades to line speed at Rugby and Norton Bridge, allowing the decrease in journey times. Unfortunately, the completion came with the announcement of rail fare rises, with Virgin's fares rising by up to 7% from January 2009. With the upgrade finishing, the DfT confirmed that it had placed an order with Alstom for 106 new Pendolino carriages, enabling all sets to be 9 or 11 carriages, with 4 brand new 11-car Pendolinos ordered, with there being 35 11-car trains in service by 2012. However, despite the upgrades, the new timetable didn't go exactly to plan. On the first day of the new timetable, despite the £9 billion upgrade to infrastructure, a blown fuse in a track circuit near Euston led to huge knock-on delays across the whole network for the day, despite the primary issue being resolved just an hour after it occurred. Other delays due to small teething problems occurred during the first few weeks of the new timetable, and did lead to a dip in overall punctuality from 86% of services arriving within 10 minutes of their scheduled arrival times, down to just 80%. In 2009, Virgin confirmed that the refresh for the 21 Super Voyagers had been finished early, having started in 2008. Updated galley areas, as well as relocated shop, were just some of the improvements. A hybrid first and standard class coach was also implemented to allow for 2 carriages of first class during busier periods. Elsewhere, Virgin confirmed that there would be an introduction of a practically non-stop Euston to Glasgow service, leaving at 16:30, calling at just Preston. This came with an increase of London to Glasgow services from 9 to 13 per day by December 2008, with other changes including an hourly Euston to Chester service being introduced, as well as a £1 million refresh of Warrington Bank Quay. Special fares for Virgin passengers changing to Eurostar services were also introduced, as well as the opening of first-class lounges for weekend travellers. Furthermore, in late 2009, Virgin launched free Wi-Fi on its Super Voyagers, who would join the Pendolino and Pretendolino, with the whole fleet now having Wi-Fi. Elsewhere in 2009, Richard Branson was back in the headlines after he launched a campaign to have the next franchise, after 2012, extended to 30 years, which would allow Virgin to spend much more on infrastructure and could see a return on that investment. Branson suggested that he could get Birmingham to London journey times down to under an hour, with the Department for Transport rejecting this 30-year campaign, as well as Virgin's bid to extend their current franchise by 2 years. In 2010, Virgin announced it would be upgrading its remaining 4-car Class 221s to 5 carriages. To achieve this, they disbanded 1 4-car set and used the 2 intermediate carriages to extend the 2 other 4 cars to 5 coaches, with the 2 driving cars placed in warm storage. This would mean that Virgin would be running the same amount of services, using 18 out of the now 20 Super Voyagers per day, but with increased capacity. In January 2011, the Department for Transport announced it would be calling forward bidders for the next Intercity West Coast franchise. However, the overall bidding and franchising process was a complete failure. To find out what went horribly wrong, tune in for part 2 of this Virgin Trains West Coast mini-series. Apologies for this week's video ending without a conclusion. However, it would have been just too long to make it in 1 week, with my brilliant members voting to split the operator into 2 videos to ensure I could still release 1 video a week. But we can come to some judgments of Virgin's operations thus far. So far, I would certainly be tipping Virgin's operations to be a success. Already in just over 10 years, they have brought in 2 new fleets of trains, operated relatively successfully throughout rail tracks and Network Rail's mishaps, and invested heavily into improving reliability and punctuality. But what do you think? Have Virgin thus far been a success? And do you have any memories of Virgin? Do let me know in the comments below, and make sure to consider subscribing to ensure you don't miss the final part of this Virgin West Coast Operator mini-series. Also, special thanks to my first class member, Callum Martin Bell, business loan members, Andrew Bowen, Anthony Harris, Anthony James Moore, ARK, Connor Grieg, Craig Mitchell 43, Jay Teco, and Lewis C21. Also thanks to Deva Rooney for being a member for 6 months, and all my standard class members. Get your name on this list from as little as £2.99 a month, and help me to make my videos. I really appreciate it. Also, big thanks to everyone who let me use their footage for today's video. You can find their channels in the description or pinned comment. Thanks so much for watching. Check out my Twitter, Discord and Instagram in the links below, and I'll see you in part 2. Goodbye.